guys, it's Julie Spencer, author of the Buxton Peak series. We're working our way through Buxton Peak, the early years, and starting into chapter 18. I hope that if you're liking these videos that you will give them a thumbs up and share them on social media and subscribe to my channel, and we'll get started into the next chapter. Okay. Buxton Peak, the early years, chapter 18, Backstage Pass. Ian was surrounded on all sides by multiple bodyguards, none of whom were comfortable with him being this close to an open door with thousands of screaming fans trying to push their way inside the building. A limousine pulling up to a side entrance at the stadium was a magnet, drawing fans who wanted to get a peek at whomever was being delivered. Ian had insisted on being the person to open the limo door for Sasha and her family. Jimmy Larson was first to step from the limo, and Ian pulled him into a brotherly hug. "How are you liking that guitar?" "I love it. It's the nicest guitar I've ever played. Thank you again so much." "You're very welcome." Ian was distracted when a beautiful porcelain doll with long blonde curls stepped from the limo. He held out his hand to help her stand on dainty high-heeled shoes that accentuated Sasha's slender calf muscles. "Get your mind out of the gutter, Ian Taylor," he chastised himself. "Hello there, handsome." Sasha kept her hand in his while he drew hers to his lips in a classic show of the respect he'd give to a princess. Ian winked at Sasha and turned to help her mum out of the car. He greeted her in a similar fashion, kissing her hand like a gentleman. When Clayton stepped out of the limo, Ian shook his hand and led them inside. Bodyguards folded in behind them, and the doors were shut, closing out the throngs of people. "Do you have to deal with that at every show?" Sasha asked. "Nah, they usually have me locked up backstage this close to show times," Ian said. "I don't usually get to see the fans up close much anymore. It's too much work for my bodyguards." Ian grinned and looked around at them, at the stoic men protecting him on all sides. None of them cracked a smile at Ian's joke, not even Ed. True professionals. "We reserved a prime suite, and you'll be well cared for during the show." Ian held Sasha's hand as he led them through the complicated maze of hallways and scaffolding. "I'm also sending Ed up there, so you can have someone I trust with you. He'll be in touch with the people who will help you find your limo to take you back to the hotel. I hope the accommodations are to your liking." Ian nodded to Clayton and Maggie. "It's more than we could have asked for," Clayton replied. "You really didn't need to go so far out of your way," Maggie said. "I have a secret." Ian leaned close. "All I did was wave my magic wand, and it all just sort of happened." His pretended seriousness was obvious. "Well, your team did a marvelous job of setting us up quite nicely," Sasha said. "Once you go up to the suite, I won't be able to come visit you, so I'll have to say goodbye down here." He pulled Sasha's hand through his arm as if he were leading a lady to a grand ballroom instead of the back hallways of a large stadium. "But for now, let's go meet my mates." "Are we really going to meet the other band members?" Jimmy asked. "Of course." Ian hesitated. "Although I never know what to expect with those guys. They don't exactly share our church values. They may have had a pint or two by now." "I assure you, we'll be fine," Maggie said. After wandering through multiple hallways, they came to an unassuming door, and Ian knocked. "Kai, can we come in?" "It's open," Kai called from inside. When Ian peeked in to see Kai fully dressed and alone, he was grateful. "Oh, hey, you brought company. Hello." Kai walked over to the Larson family with an extended hand and a smile. "Kai, this is my friend Sasha, and her parents and brother." Ian pulled Jimmy forward. "Jimmy is quite the guitar player." "Well, I've taken a few lessons, that's all." Jimmy's face and neck turned red. "That's great," Kai said, giving Jimmy a friendly smile. "Keep at it. Playing guitar is the best." "Wow, are these all yours?" Jimmy invited himself to the far wall where several electric guitars rested in stands. "Those are just the ones I practice with," Kai said. "The rest of them are already on stage." "The rest of them?" Jimmy's eyes were huge. "How many guitars do you have?" Kai shook his head and looked over at Ian. They both shrugged. "I don't know," Kai said. "A whole bunch of them, I guess." "This one's my favorite." Ian traipsed over to the lineup and selected a Paul Reed Smith guitar. He sat down on the sofa and clipped the strap around his neck. Ian gestured to Kai in his nonverbal communication, indicating that he should join him for a quick jam session with Jimmy. "Aw, pal, I keep that old thing around just for you because I know you don't like my Gibsons." Kai picked up a very nice shiny red Gibson and handed it to Jimmy. "Hey," Ian interrupted, "this is quite possibly the most superlative instrument money could buy. It's light and sleek, and the quality. Oh!" Ian turned the guitar over, examining the back, then rested it in his lap again. "Plus, the PRS is just gorgeous to look at." Ian glanced up at Sasha and winked. "Money is the key word in your statement, mate." Ian selected his own favorite and plugged it into a small amp. "That thing cost you a pretty penny, and you know it. Now the Gibson, you get the best quality for a better price." Jimmy stood there holding the red guitar, looking unsure of himself. "Do you play electric?" Kai asked, "or just acoustic?" "Well, no, I've never taken lessons on the electric." "Come, sit down." Kai patted the seat next to him on the couch opposite Ian. "The electric guitar is a completely different experience. Plug this in right here." The speaker began a slight reverberation that startled Jimmy. He chuckled and hunched his shoulders forward. Jimmy touched the strings lightly and with hesitation, and then he grinned up at his dad, biting his lower lip. Ian realized they'd excluded the rest of the family, and he motioned for them to join him. Sasha came over to sit next to Ian, her mom beside her, and her dad sat in a nearby chair. All eyes were on the grinning 15-year-old who was living every young guitar player's dream. Kai showed Jimmy how to hold his fingers on the bridge and how the sound was different with a pick compared to using just the fingers. Ian laced his own fingers with Sasha, waiting for the mini lesson to complete. "Having fun?" he asked. She leaned closer. "Almost as much fun as my little brother." Sasha nudged Ian's shoulder. "Thank you for doing all this." "It's my pleasure." Ian drew his attention back to Kai and Jimmy, who seemed ready to jam. A feather touch of tension to one of the strings on the electric guitar, and the sound poured through the small speakers. Even though they kept to a very low volume, the grinding intensity filled the room as if the guitars were speaking to one another. Kai and Ian instinctively adjusted their level to Jimmy's, letting him set the pace and tone. Kai showed Jimmy how bending the strings on the bridge intensified the sound. "Hey, Ian," Sasha interrupted. "Would you and Kai be willing to show us something really impressive, like one of your song's cool guitar solos or something?" Translation: "We're bored with a guitar lesson. We want to hear the rock stars play together." Ian understood the message. "How about Stone Ridge?" Kai asked, raising his eyebrows at Sasha. "Quit flirting with my girl, pal," Ian thought. He was glad he had kept his thought to himself. "You have a great solo in that song." He narrowed his eyes at Kai. "Let's hear you play it with me," Kai challenged. They locked eyes and wailed through the solo as if they were the only two in the room, focused completely on the sound, forgetting time and place. It only lasted 30 seconds, but it created a lasting hum that hung in the room like waves of fog. "Wow!" Clayton Larson shook his head, leaning his elbows forward and resting them on his knees. "I had no idea you could play that well." "You obviously hadn't listened to their CDs," Maggie smirked at her husband. "You have?" "Of course. I had to know what I was getting myself into by agreeing to come to this concert." She turned to Ian. "Your second CD is, intense." "I thought you were going to say inappropriate," Ian said, cringing. "Well, you've grown up a little since then," Maggie acknowledged. "That's what my mom says, too." The door flew open, hitting the far wall and startling everyone in the dressing room. "Didn't know we were missing a jam session." Andy stopped short when he realized the room was full of strangers. Gary followed close behind and ran into Andy, pushing them both into the room, causing him to break out into barely controlled laughter. "What's up?" Gary stopped laughing briefly to acknowledge Ian's friends, and then stumbled over and slouched into a chair, trying to control his snickering. "What did you do?" Ian stood up from the sofa, ripping the cord from his guitar in the process. The reverberation from the amplifier screeched, and Kai pulled himself forward to flip the switch and turn off the power. "Nothing." Gary answered. I just can't stop laughing because Andy's so funny. Gary's puffy eyes and the hint of marijuana that followed him in the door told a different story. Ian had never felt more embarrassed in his life. He had wanted to impress Sasha's family by introducing his band, and Gary was in no condition to be in mixed company. What am I supposed to do? Ian sat back down, trying to save face. Andy, Gary, I want you to meet my friend Sasha, her brother Jimmy, and her parents, Clayton and Maggie Larson. Andy glanced around the room with apprehension. These are my mates, Andy Smith and Gary Owens. It's a pleasure to meet you. Clayton stood and offered a hand to Andy and then Gary. He was either very good at pretending or not upset by Gary's condition. Jimmy was completely starstruck about being in the room with 4 rock stars. Maggie almost seemed amused, and Sasha looked like she was flirting. Really? What are you doing? Ian whispered to Sasha. I've only ever seen them in pictures and YouTube videos. You never told me they were so hot, Sasha whispered back. Gee, I guess it slipped my mind. Ian wasn't sure if he should laugh or cry. He chose to laugh. You are full of surprises, aren't you? Ian regarded the scene as if from afar. Clayton was having an in-depth conversation with Gary about a restaurant in London they both liked. Maggie was asking Andy about what his mom did for a living. Jimmy was seated next to Kai, discussing the differences between playing the electric versus the acoustic guitar. Sasha's eyes were lit and animated. If he hadn't seen her in a church dress with a missionary name tag, she could have passed for a groupie. Ian half wondered how this scene would be different if her parents weren't here. Would she be flirting even more? With whom? Would he even stand a chance with her if Kai, Andy, or even Gary had met her first? He shook his doubts away and laced his fingers through hers. This is the coolest experience of my life, Sasha whispered. She didn't even turn her head to look at Ian, just kept watching the interactions between her family and the guys from Buxton Peak. Better than when President Uchtdorf came to speak at our mission conference last year? Ian pressed his hand to his chest as if she'd shoved a knife in his heart. You got me, her smile teased him. Okay, so this is the second coolest experience of my life. Wait till you see us in concert. Ian gave her a coy eyebrow wag and squeezed her hand gently. As if on cue, Jeremy poked his head in the door. Almost time, guys. He stepped all the way inside. Well, hello, you must be the Larsons. Everyone stood and stretched, allowing introductions around the room. It was a swirl of commotion as Jeremy gave instructions for the guys to head over to the wardrobe and informed the Larsons they would be escorted to their suite. Jeremy sniffed at Gary and shook his head in disgust. He dismissed Gary with a wave of his hand, effectively shooing him out the door. Ian felt detached from the scene. This was it. He was about to say goodbye to Sasha and her family and didn't know when or if he'd ever see them again. He was about to leave on tour for the first time in over 2 years. It felt surreal. It was an end of one phase of Ian's life and the beginning of another. I want to dedicate a song to you tonight, Ian whispered, stepping up behind Sasha and taking advantage of her parents' distraction. He twirled one lock of her curls in his hand. I won't have the chance to say the words at the time the song begins, but I wanted to let you know that I think of you every time we practice it. Will I know the song? Sasha whispered back, leaning into his chest. Ian impulsively grabbed Sasha from behind and wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her hair. He held her with a nostalgic longing. Ian wasn't sure what he was going to miss, Sasha or what she represented for him. An innocence, a time in his life devoted 100% to God. She was purity. She was goodness and love and devotion wrapped into one beautiful porcelain doll with long blonde curls. Part of his heart wanted to get lost in that moment and hold her forever. But a stronger portion of him was pulling him toward the stage and all it represented. Freedom, life, passion, music. It was time. He was ready. You'll know it, sweet child. Ian kissed the top of her head and slowly pulled away, taking one last deep breath of the sweet fragrance that was Sasha. Before he could change his mind, Ian strode to the other side of the room and said goodbyes to Clayton and Maggie and Jimmy. As he neared the door, he turned and held Sasha's gaze one last time. Enjoy the show. Ian followed Kai and Andy as they headed off to find Gary and get to the wardrobe team. He didn't look back. That is the end of chapter 18, and chapter 19 is called Good Morning, and we will get to that in the next chapter. Hope that if you're liking these videos that you give them a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and share the videos on social media so that others can see them too. All right, see you next time.